Hey, it's Patrick from JMP Cycles, and today we're going to be working on our Milwaukee 8 Road King, and what we're going to be doing is putting a BDL belt drive on this. Now, belt drives kind of like old school hot rod stuff, and typically they ran them really wide, but now BDL has a narrower one. We can fit our belt drive on here in between our floorboard and still be good to go. Belt drives, they are an upgrade. Like I said, they're a hot rod item. You can hold more horsepower, and the BDL one is going to come with a really nice clutch setup as well. But to get going, we're going to need to remove both of our floorboards, our shifting setup out of the way. We'll drain the primary fluid out of this, get our primary cover off, and get down to the nuts and bolts on the inside. That's another plus of the belt drive. It'll have a dry clutch setup. There'll be no more fluids ever to change on the primary side here. So let's get to work, get this off. We're gonna move up here to the front floorboard. We're gonna use our 5/16 Allen again, and I'm gonna take both of these brackets off. This one and this one. I'm gonna pull the whole thing off, whole board and everything will come with it. Okay, so we'll get our shifting arms off. We're gonna use a 1/4 inch Allen. There's one here, and we'll slide those off. So the drain plug is right underneath here. It takes a 5/8 socket. We're going to pull that out, let all of our fluid drain out before we take our primary off. So we're basically done draining here. I'll run my drain plug back into it, and then I'm going to take all the bolts out, pull the primary cover off. Now this thing isn't bone dry by any stretch of the imagination. When you take this cover off, it's going to make a little bit of a mess. So I always put greasy rags down there, kind of catch the mess, because most of the fluid's out, but there's still primary fluid covering everything in here. So we're going to use a 3/16 Allen, take all these screws out, and it's probably going to hang there even though the screws are out. Sometimes it seals up good with the gasket. You might have to smack it with your hand to get it to come loose. Okay, so now we're going to start disassembling the actual primary drive itself, and to do that we need to get the tension off this. So this is the cam chain tensioner down here. We're going to remove it, then we're going to remove the center portion of the push rod actuation here on the clutch to get to our clutch hub nut. But the first thing we need to do is try to get a zip tie around the tensioner because it's under spring pressure. You don't necessarily have to do that, I don't think. I think you'd probably get it out of there. It'd probably just go easier if we can zip tie that and then pull these two bolts out here. So these are 1/2 inch. You need a 1/2 inch socket for this. We'll pull this loose out of here, and then you're gonna need a set of snap ring pliers to get this snap ring off. But we'll go ahead and work on this tensioner first. That's probably what the zip tie is for. Keep you from smashing the shit out of your finger. So according to the Harley manual, they want you to squeeze this clutch lever a little bit and take the eyelet end of a zip tie and wedge in here like that. It must create some sort of spacing they want. I wish I was smart enough to tell you why, but the manual says to put this zip tie in here before we take the snap ring off. now we can go ahead and take the push rod actuator here, take it out because we're going to replace it with a BDL when we put the belt drive on. This is the nut in here that we have to take off to get the clutch hub loose. This nut is reverse thread, very important. So it's backwards thread from normal, so we're going to actually have to act like we're tightening it up to get it to loosen up. Now, you are going to need a special tool. I'll put a link in the description to these tools that jam up the primary. I actually just made my own out of a piece of steel. You can do the same, or you can buy the really nice professional model. But you just need a nice piece of steel that fits inside the teeth here of the primary to wedge in here so this can't move. So now we have to take off the main bolt in the compensator sprocket up here, and that is a T70. Not a lot of people have these laying around, so you probably have to buy this for this installation, but it's a T70, and this thing is torqued to 175 foot-pounds. So you're definitely going to need the bar to lock up the sprockets here, and then a really big breaker bar. If I can't get it with the breaker bar, I will hit this with an impact if I have to. I don't really want to, but there's a good chance it's going to be stuck on there pretty good. But we should be able to break it loose with some elbow grease and possibly an impact. Once we get this bolt out, it'll slide out of there, and then you have to take the comp sprocket and the clutch hub basket off at the same time. Can't take them out of there one at a time because the chain's holding them together. Oh, there we go. So we got our comp bolt broke loose and went really, really well. If you're out there and you're struggling, stick with it. I've been there. Just make sure you have a nice bar blocking that up. Now that we have ours broke loose, I'm going to move my bar. I'm going to get all this stuff down here out of the way, so when I pull this off, I can just set it right down. This is going to be kind of messy and weird. So let's clear your work area so you can set this right down. That's the clutch hub and your front compensating sprocket. Now, since we're putting a belt drive back on here, we really don't have to pay attention to the order that this stuff comes off. Your manual will tell you, and I highly recommend if you're going to do this, to have a manual just to reference. But we're just going to take it off and set it to the side because we won't be reusing any of this. So now that we have the chain set up and clutch and everything out of there, we need to get this inner primary piece off. So we're going to we have to take the starter loose from over here from the inner primary, and we really should disconnect the battery before we do that because that hot wire goes to the starter. You want to bump it and make the starter spin. So we'll disconnect the battery, pull the starter loose, and then we'll pull this inner primary off. When we pull the inner primary off, this will slide out. We'll leave this kind of in place, but we got to get it out of the inner primary because this has to go through our backing plate on our belt drive. Okay, so now we're going to take the starter loose, and before I do that, I'm going to disconnect the battery. I know some of you are out there saying I should have done that first, and that's definitely true. I could have done that first. So you're going to need a 1/2-inch socket to get this little tray here with the ECM loose to get to the battery, and then to get the starter loose, there's 2 Allen heads. You're going to need a 1/4-inch Allen, something to stretch back in there, or a long ball Allen or something. We're not going to take any of the wires loose from the starter. I'm just going to pull the 2 bolts out, slide it back out of the inner primary, and just leave it sit there. It just doesn't have to go anywhere. It just has to be free of the inner primary. So 1/2-inch socket, and get this battery. This tray is on a little peg down here, and you can slide it forward and then just get it completely out of your way. It's on this little peg. There's a little tab that goes, or a little peg that goes through there like that. Then you can pull this out of your way. Just take loose here. Just slide it underneath here in case that feels like it wants to try to make contact again. We're gonna take out this bolt here, 1/4 inch Allen, and then you can see the one right over here, another 1/4 inch Allen. If you have to, you can take the other end of this positive terminal off the starter right here to get to that bolt. I think I can get to it without taking that off, but if you want, grab a 1/2 inch, pull that loose. And then we're just gonna pull the bolt out, pull the starter back, and just kind of leave it lay here because it's threaded into this inner primary over here, and we gotta get that inner primary off. We're gonna put the starter back on later, so we'll just leave it sit right here. Pull that loose like that. We'll just leave it sit right there while we take the inner primary off. Now we're gonna take these 5 bolts out right here. Need a 1/2 inch ratchet. Get those loose. You might have to give this a little bit of a love tap, not too much because this is riding on a bearing here in your main shaft. And we'll slide this whole thing off. Make sure you slide your shifter mechanism out of the way when you do that. We'll lay it right here. It's gonna have some fluid laying in it, so have some rags ready. Before we take the inner primary off, we need to take this loose because we're going to need to reuse this. So I'll pull this loose from here, and it'll pull the shift rod off. And then after we get the inner primary off, we can take this loose and pull the spline shaft out of here because we're going to reuse all of this. Okay, so the next thing we have to do to completely finish our disassembly is pull this race off this main shaft. To do that, we're gonna use our Jim's tool here. You can see how I have it set up. This little cup piece here, it's got a stepped spot in it, and this is real narrow behind here, so that'll slip over this main shaft. Our two threaded pieces going through here. This is gonna hold those. This is gonna thread into there and push and create that pulling to pull that race off there. Now in the past, I have tried to rig up like 2 and 3 finger pullers to get back there to pull this stuff off. It doesn't work. You pretty much are gonna have to use this specialty Jim's tool because this thing is on there. And sometimes they still don't come off and you got to heat them up a little bit. Let's hope for the best. So a couple of things. You wanna make sure that sits all the way down. There's no gap there. And then I put a little bit of oil on my threads just to make sure everything moves nice and smooth. Make sure these screws are at most flush with the back of that C-shaped piece, otherwise it'll get in the way. So we're good to go. We're gonna hold on to the flat piece here, and then we're gonna take a 3/4 and start turning this, and hopefully she comes loose. There she is, and of course that will stay off. We won't need to reuse that. Okay, so now we're gonna start putting on our motor plates. And I say plates because we actually have a 2-piece version. There is a 1-piece that's gonna be fairly similar, but we got the 2-piece version. So I'm just gonna test fit this back plate. We're gonna end up with 3 points to fasten it here. But first, I just wanna slide this over the main shaft. This should be a pretty tight fit with this bearing, but I just wanna make sure everything's copacetic before I go Loctite anything and get too far along. It's a pretty snug fit. Everything fits. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this off. The reason I'm pulling this off is because I do want to Loctite these screws, but I don't want to put Loctite on the screw. I want to put it in the hole. The reason for doing that is I don't want to get any Loctite in between the two mating surfaces, because the alignment of these two plates is pretty finite. If there's Loctite was on the screw and it was to get in between the two mating surfaces, it could potentially push those apart. So I'm just going to pull this off, put some Loctite in the holes there. There's 5 of these bigger screws. They're going to give you 2 different sizes of these Allen screws here. There's 5 of the bigger ones. That's the first ones we're using right now. And then we will torque those to between 25 and 28 foot-pounds. BDL didn't give us a torque spec. I'm going off the factory torque spec, which is 25 to 28 foot-pounds. I just set the old torque wrench at 26 foot-pounds, so we'll go with that. We'll be using a 1/4 inch Allen for these bad boys. I'm gonna pull this off, Loctite this, and get these screws in there. So now I'm gonna put the front plate on, but I'm gonna reuse the gasket that was in there. And basically we're just using it as a spacer to help line things up. So we're gonna reuse the stock gasket, and I'm going to put the 2 bigger Allen screws in this location. In this location, you can kind of see there. And we'll torque them to 26 foot-pounds as well. And then we'll put the smaller screws in. But again, I'll put the Loctite in ahead of time. And the smaller screws, I'm gonna back off. Again, I don't have a torque spec from BDL, so I'm just gonna torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Before I torque all these, I'm just gonna get everything started so it lines up. And then we'll go back and we'll torque these 2 at 26 foot-pounds, and we'll do these small ones at 16 to 18 foot-pounds. So now we're gonna go up here with our 3/16 Allen to our smaller ones and torque these to 15 to 18 foot-pounds. Okay, so now we're going to put our clutch assembly and our front pulley on and check for our belt alignment. Before we do that, you want to make sure these shafts are nice and clean. All the splines are clean. A lot of times there'll be Loctite on the clutch hub, where the splines are for the clutch hub, the main shaft here. If you have to use a wire brush or something, clean those off. Ours are good and clean. And these are really kind of finite splines and the broaching here. So you may have to, I have a mark on mine that had it on and off there, but it will go on, you know, with the mark not lined up. The reason I did that is sometimes if we don't want to go on, you can see how tight that is. I mean, once it starts, it'll slide right on. You may have to rotate it like a half a turn or something. I just put the marks on there. My marks don't have to line up exactly right on. That's just the side that went on the easiest. So got that pushed all the way on there. Gonna basically do the same thing with the clutch hub, and it's not broached all the way through. You can see it stopped there, so that's what's gonna set the depth on this. But slide this one on there, probably have to wiggle it around a bit, and then it'll slide on there. Now we got them set in there all the way. Now you're gonna need a straight edge. What we're looking to do here is line up our belt. We're gonna hold the straight edge across this edge right here where the belt will ride, and we're gonna look to see how it runs out up here. So I'm gonna take this straight piece of metal, and I got it bumped up against this piece here, and I'm looking to see, it's simulating the belt, and and I'm looking to see where it's gonna be at right here. And if this piece of metal was over, we would shim this pulley out to make sure the pulley comes out farther than the straight edge. Because this is where the belt's gonna ride. And you want that belt to basically ride in the middle of that pulley. And if for some reason the pulley was set too far back in and that belt was over, we'd want to move the pulley out. But we're actually in really good shape. The other thing you want to look for here is that this output shaft is not past the end of this pulley here, because then it won't tighten up. Put the bolt in there, it won't be pushing down on the pulley. So we have plenty of room there. And then up here, we're actually lined up pretty well. We have a little bit on this side, a little bit on that side, which is pretty much what we're looking for, but definitely lay that straight edge across there. When you put the belt on, you want to make sure the letters are so you can read them. According to BDL, you want to be able to read this print when you're putting it on. So this is the correct way. The wrong way would be like this, because now it's upside down for us reading it. So now that we've checked our belt alignment, we need to go ahead and get ready to do our assembly. But first, we have to take our clutch and clutch hub apart and get all the fibers and steels out of there. And we're gonna soak the clutch fibers in automatic transmission fluid, type F automatic transmission fluid, and just need to soak the fibers. You don't need to soak the steels. So we're gonna pull them out of here and get them soaking while we do our for realsy install of the pulleys. When you take this apart, you have to be careful because this is the BDL ball bearing style clutch. So underneath this pressure plate right here is ball bearings. So if you have it sitting up or leaning, you're gonna lose them ball bearings out of there. So I have it on a flat surface here just to avoid that. So we'll pull this pressure plate off. This is the spring, and you see the ball bearings in here. They will come out. You don't want to tip it or anything like that. So I'm just going to take the whole thing, this pressure plate off, set it under the bike here. And then at this point, you can just flip this over. You can pick them out of there one at a time, but you can also just dump them out. So then we have our fibers and steels. A couple things to note, and I'll go over this again when we go over the assembly, is you have one steel here that's thicker than all the rest. There are thin steels and thick steels. That thick steel, when we go to put this back together, is gonna be the first one in. But for right now, we're just gonna separate out the fibers and the steels because we need to soak the fibers. I'm just gonna pour type F automatic transmission fluid in a drain pan, and I'm gonna let those fibers soak for a while we do the other install. So for this next part, we need to take red Loctite and make sure the splines on this are clean. If there's old Loctite on there or something, we wanna make sure we get that off there with the wire brush or whatever. And then we're gonna take red Loctite and we're gonna put it on the splines of this shaft right here. Only about an inch back though. You don't need to do the whole thing. The heat treat marks are a good indication of how far back to take the red Loctite. So we're gonna fill all this with red Loctite before we put everything on with red Loctite. Okay, so the front pulley and the clutch hub and the belt all have to go on at the same time. And these are pretty tight tolerances, so it is gonna be a little bit of a trick to getting it on there, but it's not really that big a deal. Like I said, we have to make sure you can read the printing on the belt so we can read it, so it's gonna go on this way. I like to get my front pulley just kind of started because it has a little bit more of a tighter tolerance. And then we'll get the belt on the clutch hub here. And then we'll get it started here and start working it on. So now we're ready to torque everything back down. We're gonna need two more special tools. We're gonna need this tool here that locks the ring gear. And we're gonna need this tool here that locks up the clutch hub. I'll put both these in the description so you can see what you need. This is gonna allow us to torque this. We can't use that bar that we used for the stock primary. Because of how the pulleys are, you don't want to tear them up. So you're going to use these two tools to hold everything solid while we torque this. We're going to put red Loctite on the clutch hub nut. We're going to put red Loctite on the front pulley nut, and then we're going to torque them to factory specs. We'll get the Loctite on there, and then we'll get to torquing. So we're going to put our Loctite on this bolt. You can see we have the washer that sits inside this pulley to make it flush, and then we have our small washer here. Got our Loctite on there, a little more. I'm going to run this down. And this is going to be a 13/16 socket. Is what we're going to end up needing on here. Remember, the clutch hub nut back here is left-hand thread. So it's the opposite of normal. So tightening it is going to be the backwards of what we're used to. Right now, we're just going to hand tighten, put our Loctite on there. We're going to hand tighten this nut. We're going to go up to this one, and we're going to tighten it to 100 foot-pounds. And then we're going to back it off a half a turn. And then we're going to tighten it to 175 foot-pounds. And then after this is done, we're going to move back here, and it's between 70 and 80 foot-pounds. We'll put this one at 75. Okay. Half turn. And the one thing I should have mentioned before when we put this on, we're looking for about a 1/4 inch free play in the belt. We're actually pretty good there on the top and bottom, about a 1/4 inch. So it's not like a chain. It's going to be a lot more taut than that. So as long as we got about a 1/4 inch free play, we're good. So now this is all torqued down. I'm going to put the starter back on, and then we'll reassemble our clutch plates that we've had soaking, and then we'll start to get to trimming this out. So with the frictions, you only need to let them soak for 5 or 10 minutes, then just stand them up on edge, let them drip dry, and then wipe them down with a rag before the installation just to keep fluid from slinging all over. So these are all wiped down. The first thing we're going to start with is the thick steel. So we have a handful of steels here, all of them are thin, and then we have the one thick one right here. So it just keeps going fiber steel, fiber steel. If you started with the thick steel on the inside, you should, if you go every other one, end up with one thin steel on the outside as the outside plate. Just like this. So now we go to the pressure plate. Before you do that, the kit does come with a new push rod. So you get rid of the old one, you put their push rod in, and then we have to set up our pressure plate. So the pressure plate, remember, has the ball bearings here behind this spring. We have to take our little pusher piece here and slide it through here, through the throwout bearing, and put this snap ring on it. So make sure that snap ring is seated in there. You can see I'm holding this spring on here to keep these bearings in here. The other thing we need to do is take a little bit of grease, and I just grease up these O-rings a little bit, and then grease this little pocket here, because that's where that push rod's going to push back and forth on. Then we will put the pressure plate on. We're going to get these started. You can put blue Loctite on these if you please. I might actually do that. I'm just going to get one here to or two in it to hang it so I don't lose any ball bearings. And these are a 3/16 Allen. And we're going to end up torquing these between 10 and 12 foot-pounds. So I'm going to get some blue Loctite, put these four in. I'll pull these back out, put some blue Loctite in that. We'll torque them all to 10 to 12 foot-pounds. right, so now we want to check clutch actuation. So we're gonna pull in the lever, and we should see this clutch move in and out. And when this moves out, that takes the pressure off the plates and lets it freewheel, and that's the disengaging of the clutch. And then when you let the lever out, it smashes it back together. So we're back over here on the right side of the bike. We're gonna put our starter in. It just goes back very similar to the way the stock one was. It goes in that hole. It'll be like a little bit of a press fit from the O-rings. You'll feel like a little bit of resistance, but it'll go in there. Here, click in. And then we're gonna take the same screws we took out, and we're gonna put them back in and torque them to 22 to 24 foot-pounds. And you'll use a 1/4 inch Allen for those. So the last thing we're gonna do is we're gonna hook our starter back up. We had taken the positive cable off to kind of make room, and we'll put that back on. You need a 1/2 inch socket to put that back on, and if you forget about it, well, your bike's not gonna start. So we're back on this side. For the most part, our install is done. We're gonna start putting all of our trim pieces on, but we have to hook up our shifter. We're gonna put this piece, it goes in there in pieces, so I'll kind of walk through this. Now, this is the inner piece that goes through here and goes into this piece like this, and then this is the outside piece that held two, heel-toe shifters. We are actually going to knock that down to one shifter, so we're gonna have to address that so we don't have a bunch of shaft there and a bunch of play in this. So what that means is they give you two options here. One of these cones is longer than the other one. If you're gonna stay with your heel-toe shifter, you're gonna use the shorter cone. If you're gonna do like we're doing, go to a single shifter, use the longer cone. So having said that, we'll set our shorter cone aside, and then we'll start with our longer one. Now, they give you two little brass inserts here. We're going to use a longer cone, so we have the longer insert. If you look at this shaft and how it's going to end up going through here, the splines are going to be sitting partially through this cone. So we need to press in our insert from the back side of this cone, so when it's in there, it's riding in this brass piece real nicely like this. So we're gonna press it in from the back. And if you got a press, that's great. If you don't have a press, you can put it on a rag or something so you don't scratch it up, and we'll get it started. And you can use a mallet or a dead blow and just kind of tap it in there. And you're just gonna want it to end up flush with the inside of this. Okay, so now we're pretty well flush. Our shifter shaft rides in there real nice. So now we're gonna take our stock little arm here. I'm gonna take the bolt out of our linkage just so I can get this thing to hang there. So I'm just gonna stick that back through there for now. And then the shorter spline part, this is the longest part, the shorter spline part goes through this hole. And we'll put the screw that goes in there. We'll tighten this up in a second because there might be some adjustment here. So I'm gonna leave that out. And then we're gonna take our cone with the new bushing, slide it in there, and it's threaded, and we're just gonna screw it down into the base plate there. So now we can put the shifter on there, but after you get your floorboard and stuff back on there, you're probably gonna have to adjust this a little bit. But let's show you the install right now. We've upgraded to our rolling sands piece here, and you can see you don't want this to be too sloppy. So they send some little thrust washers. You may need to use a combination of the four. I'm gonna start with the wave washer and the regular washer, slip this on here, and see how that works out. See if it's too loose or if I want to tighten that up. But you do have some adjustment here. So you could adjust your shift rod out to adjust this to kind of get it all to play together. But I don't mind where ours is at, I kind of like it. And now I can tighten this piece up here too. I can put the bolt back on our shift linkage. Okay, so now we have to put our standoffs in that are gonna hold our outside guard. So basically, these are going to thread in partway into the plate, and then we're gonna thread the stud over the top. Now the only thing you really need to know about these two is they're a little different. This one has a little step in it right there. The little step has to go up against this ring gear because it's clearance for this ring gear. So the other one doesn't have a step in it. It's solid. That one's gonna go there, or one with the step is gonna go right here. And if they start to spin on you, like I said, you can stick a Allen in there and hold them. So we have two smaller standoffs that take an 1/8 inch Allen. This smaller one's gonna go, the shorter one of the smaller two is gonna go in the back here. And we're not gonna put the standoff on it just yet. We're gonna thread it in there maybe 3/4 of an inch, and we're gonna leave it sit there, and we'll get back to that one in a second. So that one's gonna sit there. This one we're gonna thread in up here. And this longer cone-shaped standoff is going to thread onto this one. So now we need to put our starter cover on up here. It's got a couple button head screws that we're going to use 5/32 Allen with. Now, the stud we put in down here, this is gonna slide over that stud. And that's why we didn't put that standoff in. We're gonna slide that over that stud right now. And now we're just gonna start these up here. We're not gonna tighten them up just yet. We're just gonna get them started. We can come back down here and we can thread this standoff on over the top of this starter guard here. Okay, so now we have this little half dome piece here. This is going to mount right to the clutch basket. I don't think you necessarily have to run this, but I like the way it looks. So we're gonna put this on. I am gonna put a little bit of blue Loctite on these tiny screws. We'll put this on, and then we'll get the top guard and the outer guard on there, and we'll be just about done. So I got our outer guard laying down. There's a groove in this guard here, and there's grooves in our motor plates. I like to try to start this one in this groove because this thing's kind of springy because it's thin. Get the top guard started in there, and then it'll line up easier on the motor plates. Then now we can put in our big Allens here in the center. I'm just gonna hand tighten them so I can make sure that this is all seated in that groove. Then we have a couple 5/32. One of them is gonna go down here and this standoff down here. The other one's gonna go up in the front standoff. So now that I know everything's good and lined up, I'm gonna start tightening things up. Don't forget, we gotta go back and tighten these two up here on our cover for our starter. And this is all aluminum. Don't get crazy tightening it up. BDL didn't give me a torque spec, but use your best judgment. I'll go back to the two big ones here. All we have to do is reinstall our floorboard and we're totally done. One belt drive installed on a Milwaukee 8 touring bike. As always, if you like what you see here, please subscribe to us. Tell your friends. If you have any comments, comment section below, and go work on those motorcycles.